Hello and welcome to another LinkedIn Live event brought to you by Orbition Group. Today I am delighted to be joined by three fantastic guests. We're going to be talking all about data literacy, from planning all the way through to impact. As always, please get your questions in. We'll try to get them all answered as we go through the session. And if we don't get to any, we'll try to get those answered at the end if possible. So we're going to be here for roughly 45 minutes to an hour, depending on how we get on with time. So as I say, please get your questions in for our guests, and let's bring them on stage. Greg, Kate, Hannah, thank you very much for joining us today. I obviously could do an introduction myself, but I won't do because I'll never do that justice. You have to put up with me today, as you can tell, very nasally. So back end of last week, I got struck down by a sickness bug from the kids, and then last night I spent the majority of the evening shouting at the TV. So I'm a little bit croaky afoot too. So Greg, kick us off. Introduction, if you would, please.
Yeah, hi, my name's Greg Freeman. I'm the CEO of Data Literacy Academy. We help large organizations like Kate's Coventry Building Society to roll out data literacy, culture and upskilling programs across the wider organization. Our specialist area tends to be in the non-data people. So we tend to do most of our work with business people and taking them on their data journey, which is the angle and the lens we'll take to today's conversation more than likely.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Kate?
Yeah, I'm Kate Jones from Coventry Building Society, and I'm the head of data product and strategy. And I've been working with Greg at the Data Literacy Academy to set up our data academy.
Nice. Thank you for joining us. And Hannah, you've become a serial LinkedIn Live webinarer. So welcome back.
Thanks for having me again. I'm not sure I want to carry that title though. But hi everyone, I'm Hannah. I am head of data culture and excellence at Admiral Group, and part of that role is founding and looking after our Data and AI Academy, where we not only do the data literacy elements that Greg and Kate have talked about and we'll discuss today, but we also look after training our data professionals as well. So excited to be here and excited for a chat.
Yep, nice. Well, thank you for agreeing to rejoin us. So I guess where I'd love to start, I guess with Kate and Hannah to start with, is just, I guess, to lay or set the scene and get a lay of the land in terms of understanding what the catalyst was for starting your data literacy programs. And I guess, was there a point in time, like what triggered the awareness that, hang on, we have a need here, we're going to need some kind of program around this? Kate, if I can come to you first.
So yeah, I joined Coventry Building Society in September, and when I joined Coventry, it was clear that there was executive level sponsorship for us improving our data culture, and part of that is about making sure that we're managing our risk in relation to data. So data became a principal risk in January of this year, and improving our data culture and literacy was viewed as a key element of making sure that we are acceptable with the level of risk with regards to our data.
Nice. Okay, makes perfect sense. Hannah, what was the catalyst for the start of the journey at Admiral?
So I think it was probably a few things. The real kind of standout moment for me was probably back in 2020 when we were going through our data strategy and really noting that, I guess, data literacy can cover all sections. It can cover those with very little data experience up to kind of our data professionals and our data folk. And we really knew that we wanted to do more to support people. But if I kind of cast back to Admiral's beginning, we are an insurance company managing risk, thinking about our prices, understanding our customers' data is integral to everything that we've done. But what we were seeing was that as we were moving into a more digital age and thinking about how we kind of diversified and set up for the future, whilst we had lots of internal provisions for training our staff, we didn't really focusing on data and what that meant. So would often find our training courses were starting to talk about using data to identify a vulnerable customer, for example, but there was no real kind of foundational data knowledge that we were training. So it was almost a series of events, and probably something that came much too late, if I'm honest. And I think we've got a real movement of data culture and data literacy becoming really at the forefront of minds, but I think probably it's a few years behind where maybe we should have been, if I reflect.
Very interesting. Greg, I'd be keen to get your perspective on this, because obviously, similarly to our line of work, you get to see a whole plethora of different organizations, different sectors, different sizes. Is there usually a kind of tipping point when these types of programs become, I guess, more palatable for businesses in terms of, now's the time?
Yeah, I think there is, and I kind of mentioned this on a Dharma webinar that I did a couple of weeks ago. I think if your business is still at a point where it doesn't buy into data, then you're probably not at the right point for a data literacy program. I think it needs to be assumed that data literacy and data is valued and understood to a point that it's valuable before you get going. So that would be a prerequisite, because if you're trying to sell data literacy to the C-suite and they don't care about data, you've got a long journey to go on. But typically we would see data literacy and culture most effectively aligned to things like change transformation programs. So if there's a particular change transformation program going on across the whole organization or across a specific department, that can be a really good way to align data literacy and culture and most importantly, get budget for it. If you're rolling out new data products and you want to align people and take people on the journey with that, I think that can be a really good time. And then if you've got a data governance, this is the one that I'm probably the most like a broken record about. If you're doing a data governance program, which obviously Hannah and Kate have both alluded to the risk of data and the kind of need for it to be done in the right way, if you don't take the people on the journey with you, they ultimately won't care about things like data quality and data risk. And like, if data is not valuable to them, if it isn't viewed as valuable, which according to Google, about 80% of the business probably doesn't see data as valuable today, just to scare everyone. If it's not seen as valuable to them, then they're not going to referee it. They're not going to do the right things with it. You have to take them on the carrot journey, which we would see as literacy, AI, data culture, as well as doing the data governance piece. So anyone who's thinking about all of those things, which most organizations are, I think it's a good time to build literacy and culture in and really get the buy-in from the people that matter, who'll spend the money and take you on a bit of a journey with it.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, obviously, buy-in as a topic is something that always comes up in these things. I think it's really interesting there that you talk about that being a prerequisite, that they've got to be bought into data before you even think about, some of this type of stuff. Kate, I want to come back to you, because you talked about there was already buy-in there, or that's the perception that you had. Who was that driven by, I guess, and why did it unravel the way it did?
So as part of our data strategy, we had 3 pillars, and every great strategy always needs 3 pillars. And data culture and literacy was a core element of that, a 3rd pillar that underpins what we want to do with our data ecosystem and our data governance and risk. So ultimately, when I joined the organisation, the data strategy had been taken to the exec and approved, and we had funding. So ultimately, my role was to basically make it happen and get the Data Academy up and running.
Nice. So it was already kind of the wheels were already in motion. You were just the person that they chose to execute. Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Hannah, if I come to you on kind of, there's a lot made right about top down v bottom up and the different approaches and all that type of good stuff. But I guess from an Admiral perspective, who drove that initial kind of, piece around let's do something here?
I think it's a really similar story to Kate's, in that we had gone through the notions of our kind of data strategy, and we'd really focused in on data culture and excellence there, and really talked about that movement of training the business and supporting people from a sense of getting them into the right space in a work environment, but also, the right thing to do is equip people with skills for the future. And so that was very much driven by our kind of UK Insurance Deputy CEO. He was the sponsor and really kind of impactfully, I guess, we were really closely aligned to the business. So really closely aligned to the data teams who were seeing value. We weren't so much aligned to our data governance function, which sat in technology at the time. And so there was a really kind of really strong sense of, this is how we move the needle. This is how we bring some of this data skill across our business. So, we were really close to those in our product areas, in our motor product areas, in our customer facing teams. And that really, I think, was a sweet spot for us and really gave us the leverage to do something great and to have the buy-in from the get-go. I think there's probably not a board meeting or a conversation at exec level that happens today without data being referenced in some shape or form, which I think we're really lucky to be a part of. And, I think that's not always the way that people get to go on this journey. So it's not something that we take for granted.
Really interesting. Greg, keen to get your perspective here, again, with the breadth of the different organisations, and obviously you work close with Kate at Coventry Building Society. Do you tend to find, I guess I'm thinking about this from a perspective of, if there's data leaders listening to this that are thinking about implementing a literacy programme, like, who's normally the key stakeholder that they need to go and, schmooze, for want of a better phrase?
Schmooze, good word. Let's go schmoozing some commercial leaders, because that is really what it comes down to. Actually, I think what we don't see is that you have to have the entire executive bought in, and that can help. If anyone gets there, that's like a win, obviously, and I would never say that it's not. But I think people sometimes see that as too much of a blocker, where they're trying to win. They've got 8 to 10 people who run the business ultimately, and they're like, if those 8 to 10 people don't support this, then how are we ever going to make this work? Well, actually, you don't need that many people. You do need commercial leaders. You need executive sponsors outside of technology. So we're always looking to get an executive sponsor in technology aligned, probably the CDO in most cases, Chief Data Officer, but 1 to 2 commercial executive sponsors who, when you first go out there, and obviously Kate and Hannah have both gone about this from a very kind of proactive way, you need access to humans. You can't get this off the ground if you don't get access to people. And a lot of your people who you will be working with will be in departments, and therefore you need to know that if you're going to do this, you've got a couple of places where you can hang your hat and say, this will be successful in this department because I know that I've got buy-in from this leader. That doesn't mean, like I said, you've got to have 8 to 10 bought in executive leaders at first. Those will come downstream. The more this works, and it does work, the more successful it is, the better the PR becomes for the program and therefore the data office. The more of those executive leaders who will get on board over time, and therefore it's about finding those first 2, those early adopters, those innovators. If we think about that adoption curve, this works exactly the same way. The other thing that I will say just quickly, just because I think Kate's made a really nice point around, obviously all data strategies have 3 pillars, some have slightly more, but people, process, technology typically. A pain point for us as a business, and that we see as a bit sad, is that when the reality of those 3 pillars is put out there in most organizations, you'll get a Big 4 consultancy to write you a 74-page cloud infrastructure document, and it'll take 7 months, 9 months to get your technology designed. You'll build all your processes, your automations. That'll be its own paper, its own program of work, its own transformation. And then in a lot of cases, the people bit just kind of gets kicked down the road and forgotten about. If I think about one of our most successful programs, the one at Bentley Motors, the Bentley Data Dojo with Andy Moore, the CDO there, why it worked so well was he took literacy and culture on from day one. It was, I've got a technology plan, I've got a process and automation plan, I've got an AI plan. Literacy will enable all of this, as will culture, and that's why it's been so successful. So it's not impossible without that, but if you are resetting or you're building a new strategy, to take it as seriously at the start as everything else, I think is a massive differentiator.
Interesting. Kate, come back to you. Did you, I guess, keen to understand some of the, I guess, the tips and tricks that you know, kind of how you went about getting that buy-in and kind of taking people on that journey from a practical perspective, you know, kind of what type of things were you doing to kind of allow that journey to flourish?
Okay, so I work really closely with our internal comms team and our L&D team, and we effectively set up a kind of a project team to launch the Data Academy. we created an internal survey around 4 learning personas. So we had a data skeptic, a data dreamer, a data knight, and a data wizard. And we looked with quite a lot of fanfare. We launched our Data Academy, sent out this survey, and we got over 700 responses across the organisation. And there's 3,000 people who work here, so we had a really great response rate. And ultimately, we directed people to some online learning based on their persona, but we also used that to identify the people that would go into our first cohort with Data Literacy Academy, and we targeted that learning at the data dreamers and data knights. So from that, we identified a functional leader, so someone at quite a senior level that we could engage with, and Greg and the team went out and met them and understood their current challenges with data and where they wanted to get to, what they needed from data to help deliver the strategy for their part of the organisation. And then we basically worked with those individuals to identify who filled in the survey, who should be in that first cohort of 100 learners. And so that took from, I think we launched the survey and the Data Academy in November of 2023. And then we started our first cohort in the spring of 2024.
Yeah, perfect. I mean, 700 responses, that's pretty impressive that you get that level of engagement from the get-go. Hannah, I'll come to you, I guess, in terms of taking people on that journey, getting them bought in, getting the adoption. Is there anything specific that you felt worked?
I think it's really about kind of never really underestimating the amount of work that goes into this type of program. And I think I've heard it referred to in lots of different ways, but often people talk about kind of rolling a stone up a hill. And once you've got that momentum, you know, you've got to keep going. And I think there's a big piece that I see, I guess, a little bit, which is that we tend to think of this activity as a side of desk activity. Usually we think people are not, much to Greg's point, it's something that you can do or you can not do, and it's not really the game changer. Whereas I think actually I'm hoping lots of this movement is around understanding that, you know, it unlocks so much value. So for us, I think the majority, so I started the academy and it was just myself for a long time. The first role we hired was an internal comms role, so much a similar journey to Kate's. But I'd probably say the first kind of, 6 to 8 weeks were not just about building a business case, but about building that internal network, because to, capitalize on Greg's point about finding those places to hang your hat, we spent lots of time thinking about how would we make a difference? What would we expect people now to be able to do, and what behaviors were we looking to change? So be that reducing data risk, be that people thinking about making data-driven decisions and not using gut feel, be that people who are now using a dashboard as opposed to asking a data person a question, be that self-service. So we spent a lot of time thinking about that behavioural element. And then I guess the difference and where our plans kind of fork, I guess, is that we did this notion of building it in-house. And so I spent a lot of time thinking about how do we engage everybody that we needed to be able to make it successful. And I think one of the other takeaways for me was that it's not one big thing. It's not a huge kind of point in time moment where you say, yes, it's done. I've accomplished this. I've set it off. It's lots of little things. And I think that moment of realizing that it's kind of a continuous journey and something to keep doing, and that you can't let the momentum stop and it has to be something that's prioritized, is probably the biggest tip and trick that I think any of us could pass on this webinar.
Yeah, 100%. I was just going to say, obviously, the general theme here is coming out that this needs to be taken seriously as a priority from the get-go, and not a side of desk or, we'll tackle the people bit when we get to that point, because, invariably you've kind of lost people already at that point. There's a couple of questions, so I'll kind of get these answered. We'll go to Matt's question where we hopefully get a bit more context on the SME thing. I'm presuming that means small, mid-size enterprise, but hopefully Hannah can just clarify that for us. So Matt's asked, for someone who is selling this service to other organizations, what is usually the typical response? Is the objection mostly budgetary or something else? Greg, I'll come to you on that because you probably have most visibility across having this conversation.
We do sell this service to organizations. So yeah, this could be the perfect question for me. I mean, it is difficult to say, Matt, if I'm honest. Like, it is different everywhere, as you'd imagine. But I think and I was actually going to link this to a point that something I think Hannah has done really, really well internally is, if this is viewed as important by the most important people, things like budget aren't questions, right? That's the big thing that everybody forgets. Projects and programs that don't get off the ground are when people who are in typically middle management roles try and do the whole thing themselves and don't see it as a bigger piece of engagement with senior leaders, and won't work with external people because they want to be seen to be doing it themselves. And actually the most successful programs we see are the ones either internally, like Hannah's, where she's gone and she's got major champions at the highest level, and therefore really once people understand how it's going to drive their wins, their scorecards, budget opens up, access opens up. Or the ones where they've done that and they've used an external partner, and it's just the ability to go to different people and do that. So I think if you roll back and just look for the objections to be overcome rather than the objections, because people always put objections in place, time, money, access, they're the same in any sales environment. But really what this is about is getting the right people strategically aligned on the value of this, and then none of those things are really barriers. So doing that well and knowing that you don't have to do it all yourself. If you're in a head of culture role or a head of data literacy role or a head of data role even, there's senior leaders who will help you and support you, and there's external partners who can support you in those conversations. That's the best way to go about this, and that's the best way to sell it in from everything I've ever seen. And that is more just generally sales, not just in data literacy probably.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. I guess if I ask that question slightly differently to Hannah and Kate, were there any objections that you came up against as you were going through this in terms of, I don't know, what did you need to demonstrate to make this a priority for the stakeholders involved? I don't know, I'll come to you first.
Yeah, so I think it's really about understanding what's important and what you're trying to do it for. I think lots of us could say we need a data literacy program, but really for us, it was about tying it to our business, and what we really value is doing the right thing and looking after our employees, but also looking after our customers. So anything that we could do to really tie it into that bigger piece of what does this benefit, or how does this benefit our customer, or how are we doing the right thing by our people, was really an important part for us. And if I think about how we were kind of challenged through our business case, it very much was how do we see what we're doing? And I can see a few questions about ROI, which I think is difficult, but what is it that we're trying to do? Let's not just do literacy or learning for a tick in a box. Let's not make this a piece where we just say, okay, we need to have it because our regulators say so, or because so-and-so X has one. It was really about coming into how do we fundamentally change behaviors? How do we equip people with the confidence to use data? How do we change the mindset of our organization to think about data first, and to consider how they create data, or how they manage data, or how they use data? So I don't know that we ever really faced a challenge per se in terms of a blocker, but that's really where I was pushed, was to think about it much more broadly, to think about the behavior change, to think about the way that we made a difference, and what that kind of change gave us over, say, doing something else that would help people. So, your usual cultural initiatives, why was it different for data, and why was literacy a part of it?
Yeah, interesting. Kate, how about in your environment? I know you said at the outset of the call, obviously the kind of sponsorship and buy-in was already there, but I guess were there things that you had to, prove, or, I guess kind of lay out to get people interested,
Well, I think we needed to demonstrate that, particularly with the work that we were going to do with the Data Literacy Academy, that the syllabus was going to meet our learning needs. So I did quite a lot of work with the L&D to identify the different groups of people that we wanted to train, and sort of validating that the content within the course was going to cover that. And one of the really great things about Data Literacy Academy was our ability to tailor the content to make it relevant for our organisation. So the other things that we've looked at are upskilling our data professionals and actually making use of the apprenticeship programs. So although you can't say it's free, because obviously there's 20% of someone's time that goes into it, but I think we looked at basically making sure that we had the right learning interventions for the right people with the right learning outcomes.
Yeah, that's really interesting. A good point, because I think from my experience in a lot of the conversations that I have, this sometimes gets tackled as a bit of a blanket, right? And I think the bespoke nature of the context of each organization is hugely important, which kind of leads me into the question that we've just managed to get some clarity on. Greg, I'll come to you for this. So I guess, again, you see different sizes and scales and stuff like that. Is the same, does the structure of these programs work? Does it look the same? Does it need to be different for, obviously an organization like Hannah's, where there's thousands of people, versus, a small business, shall we say?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be totally honest. I think there's a better fit in large organizations for this type of structured learning program. What we see is that there are even key stakeholders within large organizations who are so dragged from pillar to post or time poor that they actually become a very difficult audience. Generally, the more people a person has reporting into them. So if you think the CEO in a large organization technically has 20,000 people they're responsible for, they're probably going to be pulled from pillar to post all the time. And therefore getting them to sit down regularly in a structured fashion is going to be really, really impossible. So that's kind of one example. When you go to SME world, everybody is just wearing so many hats, generally putting out a lot of fires all the time, and everything is very reactive rather than proactive, which is, again, symptomatic in large organizations too, but probably even more so in SMEs. So it can be much more difficult to get it off the ground in such a structured fashion in SME. Equally, as everyone in the room will attest to, it isn't cheap. Like, nobody's here to tell you that doing this well is a cheap fix, and SMEs do struggle for budget, typically more than large organizations, for this type of initiative. What I would say, though, to Hannah Morley, now that we know that's her name, is what I think you have a really nice opportunity to do is to be far more influential on a one-to-one basis in a small group setting, and do far more of it from a kind of coaching and one-to-one lunch and learn type aspect, where you're not asking people to go and set aside the next 8 months of their lives to this one thing, or next 12 months of their lives to this one thing, but you're saying, actually, if you had this behavior change, or you had this knowledge shift this week or this month, then that would be valuable to you and to us as a business. So I think my recommendation, if you're running this type of thing within an SME, would be to do much more. I'll give you a similar example. We are an SME. There's probably just north of 80 people who are involved in our business, give or take. We don't run formal programs of work like this, apart from, as Hannah mentioned and Kate mentioned, we've got a few people going for apprenticeships of different kinds. But we now have a quarterly learning initiative every quarter, which just allows us to do far more specific lunch and learns on topics, whole team trainings on topics, additional readables on topics, buy people books on topics. If you can get data literacy to be one of those, which ironically I think at some point it will be for us, because that's you've got to eat your own dog food. I think that would be a good way for you to do this, rather than thinking about this massive structured program of change work, because you probably don't need it. Even it'll cost more than you want it to, and it won't be needed.
From a people perspective, and this is just me thinking out loud here, and where I often get myself in a
lot. I like it when you think out loud. Go.
Because obviously what we see in our line of work is it's typically bigger organizations that are doing this in a very structured, formal way, that then go and hire the comms people, the culture people, right? And they are typically more aligned with big business. It's not often we would see a small business that has a data comms person, as an example, right? Does that then play a part in the effectiveness? Because I guess back to the point we talked about earlier, it almost then by default becomes a bit of a side gig, like side of the desk activity for someone else, because as you said, they probably don't have the budget or the resource, etc.
Exactly, that definitely plays in my opinion. I think when even using the relationship with Coventry Building Society as an example, what Kate has beyond herself are a load of people who are doing a really good job of supporting the program. So one of the initial contacts, Lamia, was fabulous in getting it off the ground and being part of that foundational work, because she's an L&D expert and she knows this world every day. This is what she does for a living. Having a dedicated project manager and program manager who can drive it forward so that Kate doesn't have to, makes it a lot easier to run on a day-to-day basis. If you've not got those component parts, it's very difficult to run a program. That's I guess, an obvious point. So yeah, I think there's a lot of factors that mean that the formal structure works a lot better in a kind of 1,000 plus type organization. We work with a handful of businesses below 1,000 heads on our side, because they've got massively championing CDOs or massively champion heads of data who are driving it forward. But I'd say typically a structured program of learning and change is going to work more effectively in a large organization.
Nice. Okay, I'll come to you just to kind of expand on that point a little bit. I guess the relationship between the data literacy program and then having a dedicated academy for this type of stuff. How did you go about building that academy? And I guess why did you choose to go down that route?
So we wanted to use the Data Academy as a sort of template for the other key skills that we wanted to build out. So we've also set up academies for digital and software engineering. And I think it was around not reinventing the wheel. So, you know, we effectively created a place on our Engage platform. So, you know, like Facebook for work, a place where we could create our community. We already had a Learn platform where people go and do their mandatory learning. So we created a space on there for the Data Academy. We created a space on our intranet as well. So I think it's basically kind of creating a place for those conversations to happen. But I suppose much as you can do all that stuff in the virtual world, actually having those conversations with people, you know, so making sure that we had data stewards and data owners appointed, and that we were briefing, you know, up to kind of the exec board on what we wanted to do with our Data Academy and improving engagement and learning around data.
Interesting. Hannah, I know we've spoken about this in various different formats, but just talk us through how you set up your academy and I guess why you did it that way.
Yeah, so the academy for us, I guess, covers a multitude of things, and I always say calling it an academy is probably a really disservice to what it does. So we have the elements of training our data professionals, we have literacy and mindset, although much to a question that I've just seen, we don't call it literacy at all in Admiral. I'm dead against it, but for the context of this, I'm happy to. And then we have a space where we really foster that community. And I think much to the point that Greg was just making around that informal program, I often think that, and to Kate's point just now, that community can sometimes be the space which alleviates some of that need for, you know, one person to be constantly driving it. I think it always has to be a priority. So things like steercos and communities can really help make a difference when you're maybe being pulled across multiple places. So we started out really thinking about how do we pilot, and I guess really worth adding here that we started with our data professionals. So that's where we really wanted to move the needle, was in keeping great talented data people with us, as well as helping the rest of the business along. But I think very much to Kate's point, the rest of the journey sounds really similar. You know, we have an L&D space, we are linked to our central L&D pages. So we have one way to access training, and the academy sits as a part of that. So we were integral from the get-go. we made the decisions to use the same platforms that our L&D team use, so that we are, again, it's one space. And for most people, they'll never really see the difference. It just comes from somewhere else, but the learning and the process feels much the same. And I think there's a few pros and cons to that, especially in a platform that is mostly mandatory training. So lots of our AI training that we've done recently is helping us move the needle on that. But we've got a really strong L&D team that helps build that kind of curiosity of learning. And then it's about that active conversation. I think it's really important that conversation happens, that it's not just do a course and leave, or finish a task and never think about it again. I think it is that real mindset change and encouraging people to do things differently. So spending time with our business community and thinking about our leaders, how did they approach data conversations? What did they need to learn over others? How did they encourage their staff and motivate their staff to think about using data differently and to want to be a part of building this new skill? So otherwise, it's I think the blueprint almost looks really similar time and time again. And hopefully that's a lot of reassurance for people on the call, that it can look very similar and the main objectives can be really similar, but there's lots of ways to go about it. And this hopefully gives a bit of tangibleness to both sides of the path that you could take.
Yeah, really interesting. I want to come back to the communication piece around how you, I guess, get people into that space, and it doesn't just become I've taken the course, tick box, and I'll go away and carry on acting exactly as I used to before, right? But before I do that, obviously someone has put in a question about using the term literacy, which Greg, I imagine you've probably faced this on a daily basis. Reminds me similarly when I named our podcast Driven by Data, and then I had an influx of people saying, I don't like the term data driven. And I thought, well, that's great. You should have told me that before I named it. Anyway, I digress. I'm sure you've got an opinion on that topic, Greg, around literacy, fluency, whatever the case may be.
I have, and that isn't because I'm passionately behind naming the business the way we named it at all. I think I'll make it really clear, we're totally adaptable to this, and I think Hannah's opinion differs somewhat to mine, but we run programs within organizations to their kind of needs, as Kate mentioned. So we do run data fluency programs, we do run data confidence programs, we do run data literacy programs, we run data culture programs. I think the key for me is that people in rooms like this talk about that and care about it. We never meet frontline users and frontline learners who really care that much about the use of the word literacy or the framing of it. They're probably more thinking, oh my God, somebody's come to talk to me about data. How do I run away from this conversation? Let alone thinking, what's that word that followed data? So I don't think it matters, if I'm perfectly honest. We called our business what we called it because it's what it's called with Gartner, and it's what it's called in our world. But I really don't think, the person who asked the question said about languages. Yeah, I mean, most people know they're not fluent in a second language. And if we want data to be a second language, most people don't need to be fluent in it. We meet very, very few business people who need to be completely fluent in data, because if you knew everything about data and infrastructure and architecture and how to do analysis and how to do engineering, be a data professional, don't be a business professional. So I think it's the kind of conversation that happens here, but really has no impact at the front line. People can call it whatever they want, and it'll work or not work because of the quality of the program, not because of the word literacy, fluency, confidence, culture, learning, all the words.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I do think it's interesting because, as I said, the whole data-driven versus data-informed, the whole governance versus excellence, or whatever the case may be, right? And it seems to be that the conversation happens internally within the data analytics ecosystem, and then when you speak to other people outside of it, they kind of usually are not that bothered, to be honest. So interesting. Kate, I want to come back to you about the communications piece, and obviously Greg's alluded to that you've got a load of great people that work for you that help you with this, but specifically to comms, just talk us through that kind of process around how you, I guess, avoid what we discussed earlier around this just becoming something that lives on an intranet where I can go and take a course and then carry on as I were. How do you communicate, I guess, the benefits and why it's important to change behavior?
Well, I think working with the internal comms team was really good because we could make sure that when we wanted to send something out, that it wasn't going to get crowded out. So, it would get, we'd check what was in the comms calendar. And for example, when we wanted to launch our data apprenticeships, we made sure we did it in National Apprenticeship Week and had all the comms around it. I think the other thing is that much as I think I'm okay at communicating, I'm not a communication professional, a comms professional. And what they would do is, I would write something that I would want to share, and then they would basically put it into the voice that we use for Coventry Building Society and also make it more accessible as well. So I think it's just, I understand data and I know what we want to achieve with our data strategy. They're the comms professionals, and I use their expertise to make sure that we're getting our message out there and making sure that it's accessible. And just on the data literacy point, I sometimes feel a bit icky about it, but I've had no one raising any concerns. And with the personas that we had with a data skeptic, you might think people might, not want to be identified, but people, were quite proud of being identified as that persona. Which is quite interesting.
Yeah, my mind's going a million miles an hour now, so I'm going to stick with you for 1 second. How do you define who fits in what category there? Like, how do you define, right, you're a skeptic, you're a dreamer? How does that work?
Okay, I've got some definitions, so I'll read them out. So a data skeptic is someone who doesn't feel comfortable with data or is unsure about how they would use it for their role. A data dreamer is someone who uses data and can see the benefits, but they're not quite sure what to do next, so how to take it forward. A data knight, we put as someone who's on a quest for more data knowledge. So they do data activities with confidence, but they want to be able to do more and upscale. And then a data wizard is someone who's comfortable in all aspects of data and have a high skill level.
Interesting. And I presume that was you and your team that were diagnosing. People weren't self-diagnosing as, they're actually a skeptic, but they think they're a wizard, or vice versa.
Yeah, it was a survey with, sort of multiple choice options, and then we used that to identify the persona. And it was actually our data graduates who came up with the survey, so that was a great opportunity for them as well.
Right. Very good, nice. Hannah, if I come to you on the comms piece, how did you go about that kind of journey of, getting the message out there and ultimately changing behaviours and attitudes?
So when we started the academy, it became really clear that piece about rolling a stone uphill, you have to keep momentum. So we hit this real moment where we'd launched a bunch of stuff and we were having to maintain it, plus also do the next pieces, which is always a really fun problem to have. So we hired a culture and engagement officer role into the academy as one of the first things that we did. And I think, that was probably a lifetime ago now. I think we've morphed and changed that role a lot. So much like Kate said, we worked with our comms team, and we still have an internal comms person who's assigned to our area, who helps us do things like look at the calendar, look at how we're going to use the right messaging, making sure that it sounds like an admiral outside of data comms as opposed to a data person writing a data comms. I think we often get caught up in that moment of, well, it makes sense to me, and forget that it's not always the right messaging for somebody else. But really, it was about little and often. So, much to my point about it's not one big thing, it's lots of little things. We started with sharing things that we knew people wanted more of and wanted to know. So we had about 27 different departments in data. And so there was lots of things happening, but no real way of sharing what was going on. And for the wider business, lots of big platform changes and technology changes, but not a huge amount of talk past that point. And, our contact center agents are the people that create our data in lots of ways. So we wanted to really make sure that we were constantly talking to people. And so things like newsletters, our Viva Engaged Spaces, I think one of the best engaged with across the business, which, goes a long way into what we're building and how people are engaging and being a part of it. But I think I don't think you can underestimate how important it is to make something really familiar as well. Much like if you see a Google presentation, you see that color and you see that font and you just know it. I think having that ability to build the brand and really be conscious about what you're doing and intentional in the way that you're doing it goes a long way, because people start to trust it, and you build that almost integral, just knowing that it's come from the right place and knowing it's a data thing and knowing it's from the academy, or feeling like it's from Andrew still. And I think lots of that space was through people who really can focus on comms. I can write a beautiful essay, I think. I can't design an infographic or think about a flyer for an event. I can't do that in the same way that a comms person could. And I think it's that one motto I hold, and I hope the team talk about every day, is how do we add value and where do we add value? And in that moment, I didn't add value in the comms space. I knew what I wanted to share, but I didn't know how. So finding those people and being really true to what you add value to, I think helped us really hire the roles that make the difference. And we've got a phenomenal team that do incredible work. And I think I just get to sit here and tell you about all of the amazing stuff that my team get to do now.
Nice. I think obviously the key message there that I've picked up from both of you is you provide the content, but they shape the message, how it looks, how it lands, where it lands, etc., which I think is a really important point, because obviously, as you've both said, that's what they do, right? That's where they're specialists. So, which makes perfect sense, and probably back to the top of the conversation there around having the right people in the right roles and tackling this as a true, initiative that matters from day dot, as opposed to nobody's actually wanting to do this, and so now we need to change it. Once you've already been through a big journey. A couple of questions coming in. So Matt's asked one for you, Greg. You've been personally picked out, so congratulations. Obviously, you mentioned that a fuller data literacy program works best for larger organizations. What would your approach be for smaller organizations, as surely there's still a need to get everyone on board and taking data seriously and having the appetite for understanding how they can use data to make their lives easier and do their jobs more effectively?
Yeah, 100%. Like I mentioned earlier, really, with Hannah Morley's question, it definitely needs to be done, but it's just a different way of approaching it. So things like one-to-one coaching, things like small group coaching, things like lunch and learns, and semi-structured initiatives like our quarterly learn initiative. They're not as big, boom, get the whole of what we call the A team involved, which is what Hannah and Kate have described, where we've got senior execs leading it, championing it, putting their face to it. You've got L&D, that's a big thing that a large business does, but there are cut down ways that SMEs can do. So all the things I mentioned earlier and have just repeated really are going to be the ways that we would recommend going about that. And you can do that yourselves, like to hit the kind of scale that a small business wants to hit or needs to hit. It can very easily and fairly cheaply be self-run. It's just not possible at larger scale to do it that way. So that's kind of the message there, I'd say.
Nice, cool. Obviously, we've had a question come in about ROI, so I'll try to tie all this up into the next little bit about measuring success. Kate, if I come to you, I guess obviously you're into this journey now. How are you measuring success? And I guess, is there, pressure's probably too strong of a word, but are you being asked to demonstrate a ROI number? That's something that always comes up in our industry, irrespective, right? But especially around the data literacy piece. So just talk us through that.
I haven't been asked to demonstrate an ROI, but I am having to update on our progress. So I think, the measures that we've got for the different programs is, the number of people that are completing, where we are seeing evidence of them applying their new data skills, where we can see evidence of new data products that are adding value, tangible value, and also that it's supporting people on their career journeys as well. So I think, we have those measures in place. I'm regularly updating on our progress as well with the programs, and I just finished an update to the board, on our progress, and it was interesting because they wanted to understand of the 3 initiatives that we've got to deliver our strategy, how they were enabling the data culture that we want.
Interesting. Fine. Very good. Million questions floating through my head. Sorry, Hannah. How about you? Obviously, you're probably quite a way into your journey now, so this has probably evolved over time. I'm sure. But what does success look like to Admiral as it comes to kind of data literacy program?
I think this is probably the question I always dread, because I think it's really hard. And I think anybody that works in sort of a people change function, measuring ROI is really hard. And I think lots of the expectation is that we know we have to do it, and we know it's going to set us up for the future. So it's less about saying this is the ROI, and this actually is a conversation about what behaviors are we changing, what are we noticing. So all of Kate's points, I think, are absolutely spot on, and what we replicate too. I think understanding that behavior. So are we seeing less requests into our data teams to do things? Are we seeing more self-service? Are we seeing less risk across our data landscape and our data universe? Are we setting up projects with data people informed and involved from the get-go? Because I think sometimes that's where we start to see problems. As well as, are we seeing people engaging, and are we seeing it make a difference for people day in, day out? And does it have the buy-in of people? Because I think you can have the buy-in at all levels, and if nobody comes, you've got a problem there. So I think that's where we really are at the moment. And I think it's probably one that will morph and change as we think about how do we go forward in the future? What skills do we need? How do we impact on that kind of digital fluency, AI fluency, data fluency? I imagine a world where they're very much hand in hand, and people are, setting themselves up for success if they're learning this stuff now, and if we're doing the right thing. But it's often a real juggling act, and I'm yet to find a magic formula. So if somebody can come up with one in the comments, that would be fantastic. But I think it goes back to that point of what needle are you trying to move, and how are you moving it, and coming away knowing what you want to measure from the get-go, rather than trying to shoehorn a measurement in afterwards. I don't think that ever has worked for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's super fascinating, that topic in of itself, right? Because you get talk all the time about the ROI of data-led projects, and this is almost one step further removed, because you're talking about measuring how behavior then impacts a project, right? Which makes it very difficult. Greg, I want to come to you on this, because I'm sure when you're out there speaking to customers, potential customers, from a exec sponsorship perspective, they're probably asking you these type of questions, right? Around well, what do we get out of the other side? Or maybe not.
Absolutely. How annoying that question. I'm joking. So I think a lot of what's been said already is really, really important. And I think it has to be around what is the measurement of the strategic improvement of things that are important to people outside of data. So are we identifying opportunities for cost savings, for growth, all those types of things? I think to Kate's point about tangible use cases, I think this is one of the more interesting measures for the business, and the one that they really, really understand. So I kind of said that I'd actually talk about, I'd use this phrase, and I'd quote it. There's a guy called Richard Baker at BAE Systems who we work with, and I love the way that he views this whole piece around ROI in data. I think it's super smart. And he said to me over a drink the other night, what I've realized, Greg, is nobody necessarily speaks data, but everybody speaks pounds and pence. And I think one of the more interesting ways is to track those use cases that you wouldn't have found out about otherwise. So I think Gartner have started to latch onto this a little bit as well, that the more data literate and the more data culture the business becomes, the long tail of use cases that come out of places that you'd never have found opportunities for savings, for growth, for wins, just extends. I mean, we've got a use case from one of our large manufacturing clients where somebody who would never, ever be typically considered a data person, or somebody who even probably thought they worked with data before the literacy program, identified something that kind of had real impact on how often the manufacturing line stopped, and that can be one of the worst, most expensive things that happens in a manufacturing business. they'd always thought it was a machine problem. Actually, it turned out it was a data problem. Like the way the data was inputted upstream meant that it paused, and that caused loss every single week. That person would never have thought that way and had that mindset shift to identify that use case. It's a 7-figure use case. It goes back to the board as a massive win for that organization, for the program. Signing off the next X amount becomes a no-brainer because you get 10 more of those over the next 3 or 4 years, and you've made all your money back and more. So there's lots of ways you can measure it, like Power BI adoption, Tableau adoption. Those are all great measures as well, because ultimately they drive data engagement. But I do like the tangible use case is one, and that long tail. I will warn though, you have to have a hit squad of people to fix them. You can't just get use cases and then not deliver them, because that's a bit annoying. So if you're going to do that, you need to work out whether it's with a consultant partner, whether it's having a dedicated team in your team. We get this use case from the Literacy and Culture Programme. We're going to solve it within 3 months or 6 months because it's got a very measurable pounds and pence sign attached to it. Fantastic, do it. It'll be the thing that people at the board understand.
Interesting. So basically, the more literate your organisation becomes, the more use cases that you'll find that you can attach pence figures to. Interesting. Very interesting. Okay, I want to reloop back to you. Conscious we've only got a few minutes left, so for anyone out there watching / listening, get your questions in if you have any. Oh, here we go. Yep, right on cue. So Neil has asked, interested to understand the size of dedicated resource at both Cov and Admiral to support the culture. Go on very quickly. What's the, Hannah, at yours? What's the number from a headcount perspective that's involved in this?
So we are 8 across the academy team, but we have a network of trainers who spend 1 day a week across our team, as opposed to the 4 days they spend elsewhere in data. But in terms of people specifically looking at data fluency and data literacy, it's probably more like 2 to 3.
Okay, interesting. Kate, how about in Coventry Building Society?
Well, there's me, and then I have support from people from other departments, but also make sure that I get the support I need from other data leadership team members. So ultimately it is just me really, but I get access to people and their time.
Yeah, nice, very good. Running out of time, Hannah, I'm going to come to you for the last question that I've got around the measure, like how measurements change, because obviously I think you're a little bit further in the journey than maybe Kate is, but I guess as your data culture matures, does the measurement of success change at all in terms of actually what success looks like?
I don't think we've encountered this problem yet, but I anticipate that we will, and I think it will be more about how do we continue to build that momentum and continue to build that learning. So I think it will look a lot less like a scheduled training and look a lot more like applying things like tasks, like projects, like initiatives, embedding that type of thinking into other programs. And I think we're in this real moment where we're going, okay, we've got a ton of regulatory training that we do where we talk about the importance of data. And so how do we now make that the mechanism for encouraging that data learning, as opposed to also needing this whole program around it? So it's not a problem we've had yet, but it's very much something that I hope that we get to.
Yeah. Okay, is this something that you're anticipating will come your way? Have you started to plan for how that kind of those metrics change possibly?
Yes, I think, but we're still quite early on in our journey that, you know, actually getting the data to show progress on the measures we initially set out is the current focus, but I'm sure it will evolve over time.
Nice. Greg, come to you to kind of close the loop on this then. Obviously, again, having, you know, more breadth of views, I guess, across differing environments. Do you see that the culture and the maturity of that culture impacts what needs to get measured?
Yeah, I think there'll definitely be a journey towards trying to identify how culture is measured. I think is going to be a thing, but I would say that if you lead with the like pounds and pence ROI, you'll probably avoid all those questions. I think all will happen to certain places is that there'll be not enough pounds and pence evidenced, and therefore the questions will start to come. I think if people see that X use case has solved massive problem for business unit A and business unit B, then it'll be way easier to just avoid any tough questions moving forward, because all people want to see is that things are working in a language they understand, and that is probably get ahead of it by picking the right measures at first is the advice.
Nice, perfect. Well, right on cue, 4 p.m. So thank you very much, all three of you, for joining us today. Hope everyone who was tuning in enjoyed the conversation, managed to take something away from the evening, or the afternoon, should I say. And yeah, we look forward to welcoming you back again very soon. Thanks, guys.